So you're all very welcome to this webinar. My name is Nicola Borden and I will be the chairperson this evening. I am currently a biodiversity technologist at CAFRE, where our team has a role in providing environmental training. Thank you for attending tonight. Most attending tonight are here because we've identified that you are farming in the Camowen Catchment. This catchment is situated to the east and to the south of Omagh. We are focusing on this and other similar catchments as the quality of water leaving these areas has a knock-on impact on the amount of treatment needed when the water arrives in the Northern Ireland water treatment plants. This is a short event tonight, and we will commence with a presentation from my colleague Robert Beggs on the recent rush control trials carried out by CAFRE. And then Robert will hand over to Peter Quinn from Northern Ireland Water, who will give us some information on pesticides and their impact on water quality. After the presentations have finished, Robert and Peter will be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So please submit questions via the Q&A function as we go along, and these will be answered at the end. All right, Robert, thank you.
Thank you very much, Nicola. So we will make a start. So yeah, rush control, water quality in the Camowen Catchment. So just a wee bit of background to start with, really. So what is rush? There's different types of rush. So there's several different species in that family, and the main one we'll focus on tonight is soft rush. That's your common rush. So you'll see a picture on your on your right hand side there. So that's the root system and the stems of rush. So it's a plant that's just made up of stems. Normally we would talk about a plant that has leaves, but this one is just made up of stems, and those are originating from the roots. Those are rhizomes that are down below the soil here. Each of these stems will have a seed head, and that seed head can produce, you're talking probably 8,000 seeds per year. So it's a plant that produces a lot of seeds every year. Even if it didn't have those seeds, it still has its rhizomes, so it's underground roots. So the rush plant can actually spread via those rhizomes as well. So it produces seeds, but it doesn't actually need them. That plant can spread underground via those roots and form new plants. So really, why is rush a problem? So poor palatability. So generally, if you have rush in a field, it's the thing that livestock will eat last, and they'll generally not touch it until everything else is gone. It's of poor nutritional value, which is it's fairly commonly known, that one. It's a waxy surface on the plant, and there's a kind of a filler, like a filler that's inside the stem. So in terms of nutritional value to animals, it's extremely poor. So if you have rushes in a field, obviously it reduces the productivity of that area, whether you're grazing that or you're cutting that. And in terms of wildlife, it's probably a misconception that if you have a field of rushes, it's good for wildlife. It might look good for wildlife, but if those rushes are too thick or too dense, that area is essentially it's unusable, whether it be for birds or for mammals. And it tends to smother out. Rush grows quite well, so it smothers out any of our native plants or flowers that would be trying to grow in those wetter areas. So basically it reduces productivity, and it's not actually all that good for wildlife. A little rush is good for wildlife. It gives shelter for birds and mammals like hares, but once it becomes dense, it's of little value to wildlife. So where is it found? It's probably one of the few plants. It's a bit of a rarity in that it's found all over the world. If you look at that map there, there's rush in, well, probably virtually every country on that map. It grows here. It grows in North America. You'll find it in the Falklands. You'll find it in Afghanistan. The seeds have made their way to islands in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. It's in Australia. So you will find it everywhere. It's one of those plants that it's really spread over the world. As you would expect, it specializes in poorly drained, waterlogged fields. So it will grow anywhere, but that is where it is most comfortable. low fertility soils and high acidity soils. So poorly drained and low fertile acidy soils, generally where you will find rush. One of the few, rush isn't a very interesting plant as you would expect, but probably one of the few interesting things about it is the uses that it is put to or has been put to. So we still would have a few folks, I know of a few that will bale it up and dry it and use it for bedding. Still a few people do that. I've seen people drying bales of rushes on the faces of mountains. The only issue with that really is it produces so much seeds. So once you take that in, use it for bedding, and then take it out in farmyard manure, you can spread those seeds across your whole farm. So that's really the biggest issue with that. If you move clockwise, people have used it for thatching before. It's not the best plant for thatching, but it has been used. Probably the one that causes kind of most nostalgia with people is this one on your right hand side. So that's a potato pit or a potato bing, some people call those. That's basically a field store of potatoes. And then farmers, they cut beds of rushes, put the rushes over the potatoes, and then put soil on top of that there, and that stored them perfectly outside. And then you came at a later date and opened them up and used them. So it's probably the one that causes, well, I wouldn't say fondest memories, but certainly causes memories. Moving along the bottom, then there is some countries in Asia there that that weave rush into mats and things. And then one that I heard recently at one of our rush events, you'll see at the bottom left there's a field that has been shored. There was people that told me that whenever they were doing shoring, so they put their pipe in their stones, and then they put rushes over the top of the stones, and then the soil, and that stopped the soil getting down into the rushes. So generally at rush events, somebody does tell you a use that you didn't hear of, but that's probably our main past uses. So what encourages its spread? So those seeds, you can see the seed heads there. You will all know those. Those seeds, they lie dormant in the soil for about 60 years. So they're there for a long time. They need light to germinate. And generally, if the soil is poached or it is turned over, they get their light and then they germinate. And as I mentioned, they can also spread via farmyard manure. So what we'll talk about tonight, really, controlling rush. So we've a two-stage approach. So if you look at the left-hand picture in your screen there, you've got a weed wiper. We'll go on, we'll mention weed wiping just in a second. So that's your first stage. So that's really tackling the rush that you have above the ground. Second stage is, as I mentioned, they tend to thrive in waterlogged, low fertility, acidic soils. So in your second stage, there probably will be an intervention that you will need to kind of deal with those issues. So whether that be, you'll see in the top picture there, whether that be putting in a drain to try and dry out a bit of land, or whether it be putting on fertilizers if it's low fertility, or lime if it's high acidity. So you can see there's lime being spread. So two-stage approach. The first one, dealing with the rush that you have growing in the field. And the second stage is going in and trying to remedy whatever issue is encouraging that rush to grow. So the first one we'll look at is flailing. So it's an exceptionally short term measure. It can increase the rush cover. As you would expect, you're doing nothing with the seeds below the ground. The rush it can spread by its underground roots. So you're doing nothing for that. It does keep land in the past. It has kept land eligible for area-based schemes. So it's a quick fix really if you're looking something to be opened up. If you're in EFS higher, it's probably so that's the environmental farming scheme. It's probably the only method of rush control that you can undertake, and it's ineffective for long-term control. So if you look at the picture there on the right-hand side, that's a rush trial that we recently had at a farm just outside Market Hill. So that section of the field was flailed in June, and I was actually back there today, and that is that same section. So that's the photograph taken in roughly the same place. So you can see in June it did flail it off. It flailed it off very well, but in no time at all it was back to nearly as thick as it is. So you're talking, roughly 3 months there. So it's a short-term measure, and it's ineffective for long-term control. So moving on to boom spraying, it's probably one of, if not the most common. So the issues with boom spraying really is it's a large volume of spray. Obviously, if you have rushes in a field, they only cover probably a percentage of that area, but you're spraying the whole field or that whole bit of a field. It targets non-specific plants, so you are targeting the rush, but you are targeting a range of other plants in there that you have no issue with really. It contains the rush sprays contain harmful MCPA, and that is a very harmful spray. Obviously, those sprays, once they get into water, they cause a lot of issues down the line when it comes to treating for water quality. Another, probably the most important thing on this slide to take into account is that I am told that the sprays that contain MCPA, they will not kill the rhizomes. So basically, they'll kill the top bit of the rush, but they will not go underground. So they will not kill that bit. So it will grow back from those roots. So it's similar to topping really. It's a quick fix, but it's ineffective for long-term control. So moving on. So the main one tonight really that we'll try to focus on is weed wiping. So if you're familiar with weed wiping, um, some may not be. So that is a weed wiper in the picture there. So you can see it normally is trailed behind a quad or a gator, that type of vehicle. It's a small tank, and underneath this weed wiper there is bristles or a sponge. And that basically goes across and that applies a herbicide directly to the rush. The important thing with weed wiping is you need prior tight grazing of grass. So if you look at that picture there, it's not a good picture in terms of weed wiping. So if you were weed wiping this field, you would need all the grass grazed so that it was just the rush left. So you're just applying your herbicide to the rush. We'll have another picture in a second where we can maybe demonstrate that a little better. We have found in the trials that we have done, certainly in the last one that we done there at Market Hill a few months ago, it was highly effective. So it was killing probably 90 to 100% of the rush that was in the field that you could see in the field. So virtually a total kill. As a single strategy, it's probably effective for 3 to 5 years. So if you were weed wiping, it's probably effective in that time frame. And then you would also need to go in and do your interventions, whether that be improved drainage or dealing with soil fertility or soil acidity. Different to your MCPAs and your boom sprays, this one actually kills the roots. So whatever rushes get glyphosate, so that's Roundup that you would typically be using around your yard or around your house. Any rushes that have that applied, that's translocated down into the roots and that kills the root system. Just on the last point in that slide, and again, it's very important. You're talking about I think it's 6 to 8 times less herbicide that you will be applying in your field. So if we go back to the boom sprayer picture, so you can see it's a pretty big tank. There's a lot of spray coming out. If you move on to your weed wiping, you have a significantly smaller tank, and it's less volume because you're only applying your herbicide to the actual plant that you want to apply it to. So you're not targeting anything else, or you're not impacting on anything else. Yeah, as I mentioned at the very first bit there for weed wiping, so tight grazing is essential. So this is our recent trial that we had at Market Hill. So you can see the farmer was exceptionally good at getting this area grazed down. So all the grass was grazed down as tight as he could, and then the weed wiper, it came in and it ran over and it applied herbicide to all these rushes. So the contractor that was doing it, he weed wiped it one direction, and then he weed wiped it a different direction just to make sure all of those rushes were wiped. The important thing about glyphosate, so it has a life in the environment of about, I think it's about 6 days. Peter can correct me on that later if he needs to. It's in and around that. So it only lasts roughly about 6 days. It's a very short-lived chemical before it breaks down. It's less mobile in the soil, so once you put it on, it does not move all that far. Your MCPA sprays that you put on with a boom sprayer, they are very, very mobile, and they can move very easily in water. It's also a much longer lived spray. So MCPA, your boom sprayer type sprays, they're maybe living in the environment for maybe about 40 days. So that gives it time to move from the area rushes into water and then get into the water treatment works. So you have really a comparison between a spray that moves quite quickly into water and lives for a long time compared to one, our weed wiping spray here, that is less mobile and is very, very short-lived in the environment after it has been sprayed on. An important thing to note, just if anybody is weed wiping, once you weed wipe your rushes, it can be tempting to come in and top those off quite quickly just to tidy it up. We all like to keep things fairly tidy. Resist the temptation to do that if you can, because it does take sometimes longer than you think for that Roundup or that glyphosate spray to reach from the top of the rush where it has been applied right down into the roots. So it is best practice if you can leave that for as long as you can, and ideally not top it off at all. Just let the whole thing die down. The last point on your slide there, there's no spray drift. Obviously, if you have a boom sprayer, you have a large amount of spray. There is spray drifting. It's exceptional in Northern Ireland that you will get a day that there is no wind. So spray always does drift to an extent. With your weed wiper, you're only putting spray directly onto the plant that you want to target. So there is no spray drift whatsoever. That's a picture of our recent trial there at Market Hill. So that's the section of the field that was weed wiped. Earlier at the start, we showed you the section that was flailed. That's the section that was weed wiped. So the flailed section, it has grown back quite quickly, nearly to what it was. The section that's weed wiped, you can see virtually all of if not all of those rushes have died, and there's very little that has come back in that field. So you can see the difference really between the two. So it's a pretty total kill in that area of rush. A few other pictures just from other trials we had completed. If we work from kind of the left to the right there, so that was the rushes as they were that was July. In August, they were weed wiped in July at the left. If you move to the middle picture, that was August. So again, you can see they're virtually all killed. There might be a few exceptions there. And then if you move to the picture on the right-hand side, September, you can see the rushes are all dead. So in terms of interventions, weed wiping, it might be more effort. Generally, most farmers have a topper, most farmers have a boom sprayer. It's one of those ones that might take a little bit more work to get a contractor in to do it, but you can see from those pictures, you can see the results that it does give. Just if anyone has, you can get in some occasions, you can get fields that have rush and grass that are totally intermingled there. So you can see it's very hard to pick out the rush plants and the grass plants. If that is the case, you may need to flail that off completely, let the grass regrow and graze it, and then weed wipe it. So if you have a field that has a real mixture of grass and rush, you might need to top it off and let the rushes come fresh, and then weed wipe it after that there. So it can happen on some occasions. So the second part of our strategy, if we go back a few slides, I had mentioned the first stage is we deal with the rush that's above the ground, and we're certainly encouraging people to weed wipe in terms of the good job that it does and the benefit that it is for the environment and water quality. Second part is your long term. So the long term is really going in there and fixing any issues that you may have with your field that's encouraging those rushes to grow. They, as we said at the start, they tend to thrive in areas that are wet and waterlogged, and probably areas that have low fertility and have high acidity. So you've done your weed wiping. You come in if you can correct your drainage problem. So if you have if there is a fall to the drainage that's going out of that area, and you can correct the drainage, certainly that's great. You probably should soil sample after that, and that'll give you an idea of your pH and your fertility. Our recent trial at Market Hill, the farmer, he had soil sampled, so he was able to see that there was an issue with soil acidity and low fertility. And then in this example here, so if you look at the picture on your right hand side, that is lime being applied. So that was a field that had the soil was too acidic. So if you're applying limestone or you're applying nutrients, you would only do that in line with soil analysis, and it will give you a very good guide as to what you need to do. Goes without saying, if you are grazing the area, so avoid poaching it. Those rush seeds that are in the soil for 60 years, once they get light, they will readily germinate. So if you are grazing an area that has got rush, if you're grazing that area heavily and it's getting poached, you will get a lot more rush. And just at the very bottom point in that slide there, so a good grass sward will outgrow rush. So that's generally why you don't get rush in silage fields, or you don't get rush in fields that are managed intensively for grazing. So if the conditions are right, and the grass is growing, it will always outcompete those rush plants. I know it probably does seem like the other way around most times, but if the conditions are right, a good grass sward will get above rush. So just a few other things to mention just on that there. Obviously, again, it goes without saying, if you are applying lime or you are applying fertilizers, just make sure you stick to your buffer zone. So generally, if you have rush, you probably have a drain fairly close by. So just make sure if you're applying any kind of nutrients that you stick to your buffer zones that you need to maintain alongside those water courses. The last thing to mention on that slide, if you have an area that has rushes, you can't drain it. There's maybe no fall till wherever the water leaves that field. You've very, very little productivity from it. You obviously you can't cut it. You're probably not getting much from grazing it. There is another option in that you may consider planting some of those areas in trees. So it is something to consider if you have rush. We see these areas all the time where there's fields that nobody can really do anything with because you just can't drain it. If that is the case, it's something to think about because it probably will give you more from that area than you can achieve at the moment. Just a quick mention of the environmental farming scheme, just for anybody that may be in the environmental farming scheme higher. If you are in the environmental farming scheme and you're in that higher level, so chemical treatment of rush is not allowed. Tonight, it probably, if it affects anybody, it might only affect a few people. It might affect nobody. So the only thing that you can do is cut rushes, and you will cut those between the 15th of July and the 15th of March, so towards the end of the year. And that's really to account for any ground nesting birds. So if anyone is intending to cut or top or to weed wipe rushes, and you have a knowledge that there is ground nesting birds there, you should leave it as late in the season as possible. So after 15th of July, whenever any chicks have fledged. So it is good practice just to check any of these areas before you complete any work. If you're in EFS higher and you are topping, cut as close to the ground level as possible. So that goes without saying, really. So just a summary, really, before I'll hand over to Peter. So if we look at the left-hand side here, we've got our weed wiping with our glyphosate or our Roundup. In terms of comparison with boom spraying, you have 6 times less herbicide, which it goes without saying, that's good. When you're weed wiping, your weed wiper is applying the spray directly, or applying the herbicide is not actually a spray. It's applying the herbicide directly to the rush plant, so there's no spray drift going anywhere. So you can do it in a wider range of weather conditions. Your glyphosate is less mobile in the soil, so once that moves into the soil, it moves very, very slowly. It's short-lived in the environment, so it breaks down quite quickly. And probably the most important thing from a farmer's point of view, once that spray is applied to the rushes, it will kill right down into the roots. So it kills right down to the very bottom of those rhizomes to stop that plant growing again. We go over to the other column on the other side where we have boom spraying, obviously with 6 times more herbicide. It's a far bigger tank. You're spraying everything in the field, even though the rushes may only be a small percentage of that area. Spray is dependent on the wind. It's dependent on there being no wind, which is very hard to achieve. So if you're boom spraying, you have a far narrower weather window that you can operate in. Your boom sprays that contain generally MCPA, that chemical is very, very mobile in the soil. So once it's into the soil and into the water in the soil, it moves quite quickly. It's long lived in the environment, so it doesn't break down for a long time. So if you look at the picture on the right hand side there, if you apply MCPA, so your boom sprayer type sprays to the rushes in that field, and it moves into the water course, which is actually just behind the fence there. That is a long-lived spray, so that will be in the water, and it'll be in the ecosystem for, I think it's 30 to 40 days. So it hangs around for a long time. Very important to note that it doesn't kill the roots. So if you're spraying with your boom type or your boom sprayer type sprays, that will kill the top of the plant, I am told, but it will not kill down into the roots. So it's I suppose really a chemical topper that you may be applying there. And at the very bottom one there, and Peter will go on to mention this, it's very expensive to remove during the water treatment process. It costs a lot of money to filter, and it takes a lot of effort to get it out so that it allows your water, your drinking water, to be safe. And probably one of the last things that I will mention, I tend to find that it's a misconception that people think that if you look at your field to the right hand side there's the fence, and then there is quite a small water course on the other side of that fence, just between it and the trees. There's a general perception that, and it's widespread, that something that goes into a small stream, that stream makes its way to a bigger stream, which then goes to a river, which automatically goes to the sea, where it's everything's diluted. But in that instance there, in that field, you have that stream. That stream only runs for about 3 miles, maybe less than 3 miles, before it's in a reservoir and in treatment works. So the water that leaves that field is in a Northern Ireland water reservoir in about 3 miles, which is remarkably short. And there is catchments right across Northern Ireland where that is the case. So whatever you do, or whatever you may do in your field, it actually can get its way to a Northern Ireland water reservoir remarkably quick, probably a lot quicker than you would think. So it's important just to remember that it's our water, and it is very important, just to keep in mind that water that is leaving a bit of land that you may be working on could be making its way to a treatment works in a very, very short space of time. The last thing I will mention on that is just back to your buffer zones. So if you are applying nutrients to an area of rush like that there, just to try and maybe boost the soil fertility, just be mindful about your buffer zones, just to ensure that you're not applying nutrients too close to that water course that can then leach into the water course and cause a separate problem. So I think that is, yep. So that's just, I'll hand over to Peter in a second. So that's just a picture there. Look at the right hand side, that's just rush that is being weed wiped. So you can see the grass has been grazed down remarkably closely. And then the weed wiper is going along, and it is just applying the herbicide to the rush and nothing else. So there's herbicide not going anywhere else. So that's me, Peter. I can hand over to you if you're ready.
Yeah, okay, Robert, I'll try and share. Are you sharing mine or will I share
Yeah,
to you?
I can share yours. So if you just tell me when to move whenever you want.
No, that's okay. Listen, thanks Robert and Nicola for inviting me along here this evening to the webinar. And listen, just to introduce myself, I'm Peter Quinn, a catchment officer with Northern Ireland Water. And I suppose my role involves trying to improve the raw water quality, which is in the rivers, lakes and streams before it reaches the treatment works, where we have to, treat the water and make it potable and drinkable for everybody. So if we just move on to the next slide, Robert, please. Right, our drinking water. There's a map just of Northern Ireland, and as you can see there are the various different catchment areas across Northern Ireland. The wee red dots there, they are all the various water treatment works dotted across Northern Ireland. And as you can see, there's some where the red, there's different ones there, the cross-border catchments. Just a bit of background, I suppose, in Northern Ireland Water. We supply over 580 million litres per day to Northern Ireland from 24 different water treatment works. NI Water are regulated by a number of bodies to make sure that we provide clean, safe and wholesome drinking water for the public. The treatment works takes water from the rivers, lochs and reservoirs in a raw or untreated form. Apart from Rattling, they use groundwater up there. But the water in NA is split into catchments, as you can see there across, and it's just basically where all the water flows down into the various lakes and rivers, and we catch it there and take it. A number of our catchments are cross border, so we work closely with Irish Water to try and prevent or reduce pollution in the various catchments. Just move to the next slide, please, Robert. NA Water, the drinking water catchment areas. So in total, we have 38 raw water abstraction points. So that's where we take the water from the reservoirs or the rivers. The total catchment area in Northern Ireland is almost 1.3 million hectares. Of that, Northern Ireland Water owns 11,300 hectares. So across Northern Ireland, 9% is water. Peat bogs make up 14%. 11% of it's forestry, and the big hitter really is agriculture at 66%. So it's all mostly rural catchments. Pesticide application is a major treatment challenge for Northern Ireland Water, particularly, as Robert was speaking about earlier, the MCPA. The costs involved in removing the MCPA are huge. So we have to build massive GAC filters to remove the pesticide from the water. But I'll speak about that in the next slide or so. Just the next slide, please. So basically, this is where speaking about the Camowen catchment here this evening. So this is where your drinking water comes from. The Camowen, the catchment size is 25,500 hectares. Of that, Northern Ireland Water we only own 6 hectares, so that's basically just around the reservoirs. The water treatment works that feeds the Camowen is Glenhordial. We get the water from the Glenhordial Reservoir, the Camowen River and the Cross River, and there's 8 million litres a day abstracted to supply roughly 30,000 people. We're interconnected with Derg and Lochbraden, and they can feed the Camowen, and the Camowen can also feed both of those reservoirs as well. So the Camowen, it's a very big catchment, and as land managers, it's important to realise that anything basically that goes on the map you see there in front of you, be it spreading fertilizer, slurry, pesticides, whatever land management activities are carried out in the Camowen there, they'll all end up in the water courses, and we'll have to deal with whatever comes to the water treatment works. So it's a big challenge in the Camowen, and we have issues in the Camowen catchment with the herbicide MCPA. So maybe the next slide there, Robert, please. So the current challenges, as I've said before, plant protection products, pesticides, herbicides. Pesticides, they're really expensive to take out, to remove from the water. They take a lot of resources. It's not just farmers that use pesticides and herbicides. It's also the amenity sector, such as golf courses, grounds maintenance are also responsible. The pesticides obviously need to be removed from the water for human health. They're obviously not healthy for people to be drinking, so we have to take them out. So the next big issue probably is nutrient runoff. I suppose nutrients, they need to be removed as they are dangerous to health. The likes of ammonia, which is your slurry, sometimes it can reach your water treatment works, and the plant will have to be switched off, as it's that bad. So it's very, we need also, I suppose, in terms of nutrients, the nutrients need to be removed as they're dangerous to health, but they also cause terrible problems in our waterways. For instance, as fish kills, eutrophication, that's a process which causes rapid growth and decay of plants, which strangles the rivers and lakes for fish life and all sorts. So it's a big issue. Also, sediment loss, soil or carbon in the water, it takes significant work to remove at the treatment stage, and we have to use many different sorts of filters and chemical additions to try and remove the sediment as well. So I suppose all in all, NA Water frequently detect high levels of MCPA in the rivers and lakes in the Camowen Catchment. And this MCPA is removed during the treatment process, and the water is of a high quality standard. It's just the expenses involved in removing it are huge, as you'll see in the next few slides. Move on, Robert, please. That's just a wee graph there. It just shows the spikes. The red line there is the level of MCPA that DWI, which is the Drinking Water Inspectorate, want us to be under. So you can see there in Glenhardiel, several times we're breaching that there. Now, I have to say, any of the treated water that leaves the water treatment works is always well below that there. So just move on to the next slide, please, Robert. Now, that there is the Killyhevlin water treatment works in the background there. And what I'm talking about here, the GAC filter, that's this new building here in the front. It's not a small piece of, it's a massive building to try and remove this MCPA from the water. NA Water remove pesticides from the water using the granulated active carbon filters, which are GAC filters. As you can see, they're not small and they're really expensive to construct. Basically, what they are is they're a giant Brita filter. If you've ever had one of them there in your house that, you put your water and fill it out of your tap and put it into your fridge, that's what that is doing, only in a massive scale. That there building there cost about £5 million to build. And the carbon which is in that will have to be regenerated. The more pesticides that it removes from the water, it has to be regenerated. So it's huge expense to keep it going. The MCPA is a selective herbicide, specifically, as Robert was speaking about earlier. It's designed to kill weeds without harming crops, so it's very popular with farmers. It's a common active ingredient in both agricultural and domestic herbicide products. It's widely used for controlling the growth of weeds like the common soft rush, which does flourish in Northern Ireland, basically. MCPA is a problem in Northern Ireland, especially because it's a problem everywhere really, because it's very prone to leaching. It doesn't bind to the soil, so whenever you put it on, if it rains after that, it will go straight to the shucks or the rivers or the lakes, and once it's in the water, it can take 4 to 6 weeks to break down without treatment. So the next we have a wee video now next, and it'll probably show the challenges that Northern Ireland water face on a daily basis with MCPA.
In Northern Ireland, much of our drinking water is abstracted from rivers and lakes. All land management activities which go on in our catchments influence the raw water quality in those water bodies, including weed management and the use of plant protection products. The agricultural, amenity and horticultural industries all have obligations to use plant protection products following best practice guidelines. With the changing weather patterns like wetter summers and milder wetter winters becoming more of a challenge year on year, rush in particular is becoming a more widespread problem with more control required. The Water Catchment Partnership was established in 2013 and aims to promote best practice when using plant protection products. They are comprised of members from the UFU, CAFRE, DERA, NIEA, NI Water and the VI. They attend shows, roadshows and events and provide guidance on best practice and PPP use. A farmer's first course of action in the control of grassland weeds should always be to employ appropriate methods of integrated pest management where possible. The principles of IPM are: identify pests, their hosts and beneficial organisms before taking action, establish monitoring guidelines for each pest species, establish an action threshold for the pest, evaluate and implement control tactics, monitor, evaluate and document the results. IPM should be used in all situations, whether arable, grassland or upland. Chemical treatment is only a small part of a grassland weed control strategy, and that testing your soil pH and fertility, maintaining drains, sward management and grazing control are equally, if not more important. These methods can make soil inhospitable for weeds like rushes, but optimise conditions for sward. Where plant protection products are the only option, and where they are being used in a boom sprayer, best practice guidelines must be followed as detailed in the Code of Practice. Check equipment to avoid off-target drift. Fill sprayer tanks carefully in the yard. Check weather conditions are suitable. Ensure appropriate buffer zones around watercourses. Clean equipment and dispose of leftover product carefully. Never down a drain. The highest risk when using PPPs is when preparing and filling in the yard. Some 40% of all PPPs which end up in our waterways have come from working with concentrate, washings and disposal. Over the past few years, the WCP have worked with CAFRE in identifying the best method of rush control. Demonstration sites in NI where glyphosate was applied to rushes using a weed wiper produced as good a rush kill and reduced the amount of product potentially running off into our water catchments. CAFRE demonstration sites suggested that the control of very dense rush may be improved by mowing first and weed wiping the regrowth. If you are in an EFS or working within an ASSI, you need to contact your relevant scheme manager and read the guidance you've been provided with on using PPPs. All grassland products are at risk of entering water bodies across NI. MCPA in particular is currently the greatest risk to raw water quality here because it is highly soluble and can prevail in the water environment for up to 6 weeks. At a CAFRE demonstration site, MCPA applied using best practice techniques has still been detected in water bodies up to 6 weeks after application. The pesticide residue on one foil seal can pollute water in up to 18 miles of stream to a level greater than the drinking water standard. Weed wiping with glyphosate is as effective as boom spraying with MCPA for the control of rush, but has an advantage because it wipes the target weed, leaving the grass and clovers underneath untouched, therefore preserving the biodiversity of the sward. It uses less product, there is minimal drift, and there is less chance of runoff after rainfall. Weed wipers also have more efficiency of control. glyphosate also poses less risk to raw water quality than MCPA because it breaks down more quickly in the water environment.
We've been using a weed wiper on the farm for the past 5 years, and we find it's an effective way to control rushes. I find that it's an easy machine to set up and use. It's also cost effective because you're only applying the chemical to the rush rather than spraying it across the entire field. It's a machine that can be used in different weather conditions, for example when it's breezier compared with a boom sprayer. And also you're just applying the chemical to the target plant rather than across the entire field, so you're avoiding any damage to the grass sward such as the clovers and helping to maintain the biodiversity. Trying to maintain your land drainage is really important to keeping rushes out of your ground, so cleaning your shock site and fixing any wet spots. You also want to avoid any compaction and any trampling on the ground, as that really encourages rushes to grow, and also maintaining your soil fertility, so keeping your P and your K levels at the right index.
NI Water are a partner on the WCP and have a regulatory requirement to provide clean and wholesome drinking water for the people of Northern Ireland.
Rush management is important to NI Water because through our regulatory sampling regime, we regularly find levels of MCPA in the raw, untreated drinking water that we bring into our water treatment works. And MCPA is a particular issue for us because it's long-lived in the water environment. It has a long half-life, so it can reside in the water environment from between 4 and 6 weeks, which is why we find it in our raw water. We then have to remove MCPA in our treatment works process, which uses granular activated carbon filters. These filters are basically like a big Brita water filter, and they remove things like plant protection products and also volatile organic compounds and compounds which cause taste and odour issues. The issue with these filters is that they become saturated, and they also incur a significant cost to build. So one facility to house these filters might cost up to £5 million, and each filter then has to be regenerated at a cost of about £20,000 a year.
MCPA in our water courses presents a significant challenge for NI Water to remove. A great amount of work goes into treating raw water taken from our rivers and lakes to make it clean and safe to drink for everyone. PPPs like MCPA are difficult and expensive to remove during the water treatment process. Multi-million-pound investment is required to continually maintain filters capable of removing them. Applying glyphosate in a weed wiper for rush control rather than MCPA in a boom sprayer can help reduce the risk of MCPA entering our water courses, protects our drinking water catchments from pollution, and assists NI Water in providing the excellent quality drinking water we all enjoy, using fewer resources, chemicals and money. The WCP are grateful to the farmers who do a great deal of work in ensuring plant protection products do not enter our water courses. Water is a valuable resource. Farmers have control of the land and the activities they carry out on it. IPM is extremely important. Wherever PPPs are applied, best practice must always be followed. When targeting rushes, extra caution is required. Thank you for looking after our water.
That's great, Robert. Just on to the last slide there now, please. Just I hope that maybe highlights the issues and the costs involved with, you know, removing the MCPA from the water. The costs are huge, and it's crazy to think that, you know, whatever we drum a MCPA, maybe 60 or 70 pound it is, and it can cost millions to take it out. It's, you know, it just really makes you think. And so I suppose just to finish off for me, it's important to note that the pesticides that we use on our land, garden, recreation areas will all eventually end up in our waterways. So it's very, very important to ensure best practice for us all to try and reduce pollutants entering our water courses. And I suppose the takeaway message from me is stop and think about the water you drink, and please use pesticides responsibly. And that's really it from me, Robert. If there's any questions or anything now, we can go ahead with that.
Great. Thank you very much, Peter and Robert. That was very informative. Folks, if you have any questions, please submit them. So on your laptop, there will either be a Q&A or a wee question mark down in the bottom right corner, or if you're using your phone, just tap the screen and there will be a wee 3-dot icon appear and you can submit your question. I have a few in here already, so not sure who wants to answer, but can I weed wipe with MCPA? Peter, maybe if you want to. Oh,
It's that that there is, you're not allowed to use, it's illegal to use a MCPA and a weed wiper at present. So the answer is no.
okay. Perfect.
I think probably just to add to that one there, if you are going to the if you're going to the effort of weed wiping, you might as well use glyphosate, which is gonna you know, it's gonna give you a better kill than your MCPA sprays will. So if you're going to the if you're going to the length of using a weed wiper, you probably should use your sprays that'll give you a better killer rush.
Yeah, and kill off the rhizomes as well rather than
Yeah.
just the plants. So yeah, fair enough. Robert, will reseeding help reduce rushes? So if I go in and reseed a field, would that help get rid of the rush, or is it only a short term?
Well, it can be a short term if, as I mentioned, you've got your 2-stage approach where you're dealing with the rush, and then you're dealing with the issue. So if your issue is possibly drainage, and that hasn't been rectified by your reseeding, you're probably going to get your rush back again. So it's just about dealing with, you know, the issue that's causing the rush. It could be drainage, it could be fertility, it could be acidity. So if your reseeding kind of ticks all those boxes, if you're fixing your drainage, you're fixing your fertility, if it's an issue, then yeah, you'll probably go a long way to getting rid of the rush. But as I say, you could do your reseed and possibly still have a drainage issue, and the rush will be back again quite quickly.
Yeah, so need to get to the primary problem, I suppose, first.
Yeah.
Great. One in here. So my field is too wet to get machinery onto it. So is there anything else I can do?
Yeah, there's, you know, we come across that. I think I mentioned that. We do come across fields when we're out and about now and again where the field is maybe in a dip or in a hollow, and you can't correct the drainage because you know, there's no fall to the stream or whatever. You will get some fields where people maybe just they can't take tractors on there at all. The weed wiper is, it's, as I mentioned, it's usually trailed behind a quad or a gator or a, you know, a lighter type vehicle. So that might let some people away. So if you can get a quad on there with a weed wiper, which is obviously there's a lot less weight involved there, that may be an option for you. There may be some cases where that's just not feasible because it's maybe too wet for that. If it is too wet for that, I would probably, you know, mention to the person just about if there's anything that you can do in that area. You can maybe plant it in trees or plant some of it in trees, and that at least would let you get something from that area.
Yeah, great. So if there's no other questions from anyone else coming in there, I am going to close off the meeting. So I hope everyone found it very useful, and thank you all for participating. Hopefully tonight's information will allow you to better control any areas of soft rust on your farm, and hopefully then to prevent pesticides such as MCPA getting into our waterways. So I suppose tonight, yes, we've just seen the importance of using a weed wiper instead of boom spraying with MCPA to overall help reduce the rush cover, but help to increase our grass production levels, but ultimately to help improve the quality of that raw water heading to the treatment plants. So yeah, as Peter finished off with, just stop and think about the water that you're drinking before applying chemicals. So once again, whenever this meeting finishes, there will be a short survey will pop up, and we would be very much appreciative of your feedback if you were willing to give us any. So thanks again for attending.
Thanks everyone. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thank you.